Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Deep Thoughts. You know, I have tried to record an episode about racism 3 times. And in, I think one case I had a technical difficulty, but the other 2 cases I created videos that are probably about an hour and 45 minutes a piece. And watching them back, they just didn't accurately get to the point, in my opinion. It kind of had ups and downs. So this will be the 4th time I'm going to try this. We'll see if we can't get this right. But I thought it might be actually a fairly decent time to try again, given sort of the climate of what's going on right now in 2017. So what's the status right now? I'm going to get very current events, which I usually steer away from current events, because then it makes the episode seem like, I don't want to watch this. This is all about the past. This will not be all about the past, no matter when you find it. Right now we have this, what I believe to be sort of a pathetic attempt to be intellectual, which is during sporting events all around the United States right now, people are taking knees during the national anthem. And this is being sort of set up as disrespectful to the country, to the national anthem. But what's kind of interesting about it is the kneeling is sort of what you do before God. And LL Cool J had a cool video yesterday morning. He said, take 2 knees and pray to God that you don't divide our country and allow it to be conquered by others. Is sort of how I interpreted it. I guess it was like 1891 when the very first person stood up and saluted with a hand over their heart the national anthem. And it wasn't until Woodrow Wilson got into office in the early teens of the 20th century that he made it sort of the policy. Again, it's not breaking the law. You know, and I've talked about the whole thing of the Prussian education system and how one of its big objectives is to create nationalism. And it's interesting because nationalism, recognizing your nation as having its own sovereign laws and borders and all that good stuff. It's to a younger, privileged crowd of people, they don't recognize its importance. Now, what you don't want to have is a propaganda-laced government that uses the national patriotism to lie about things, to make you believe something that's not true. I don't think that's what's happening when it comes to the national anthem. But this whole thing is being construed as really as a black specific act of, racial awareness. Like the poor 100-millionaire NFL players who are, range from the age of like 20 to 35 are taking knees as if they have suffered the slings and arrows of outrageous misfortune, right? They make more money than every single person in the theater aside from the owners and the coaches, and they have something to complain about, right? But this episode is going to be about racism, and I think there's been some large advancements, some great advancements in the definition of racism, and that a lot more people are understanding that it's really culturalism, right? Doesn't really matter what color your skin is. It does, in some cases, directly correlate with a particular culture. But think about all the white people in America are far from, melted together into some culture that is singular. right? The South acts way different than the North. The East Coast and the West Coast are different. Go to Louisiana and then go to Mississippi. Two totally different worlds, and they're right by each other. The same goes for all races. It would have to be a teeny tiny race to have them all act the same. And again, I'm not familiar with all races, but I've had pretty good experience. What kills me about these sports players is that I feel like it's obviously a privilege. It's a privilege to do this when you don't have to fight for your country. I'm sure that racial things have happened to pretty much everyone in the world. There's probably a few places on Earth, maybe, where everyone's exactly the same race. I don't know, maybe 20 families that make up a community and no one ever travels anywhere. All right, well, that's got to be a single percent, if not less. But anyone who's moved around, I'm telling you, it doesn't matter what color you are, you will hear racial stuff. Now, some folks hear it really bad, and they get chased down and they get into fights, and some people get, maimed or murdered. I still think that's, in the modern world, I think that's pretty rare, right? There was a time in America before Martin Luther King when the blacks and the whites, which were really the only two races that were super duper acknowledged in the country. Well, we had a really good group of Asian folks that have been here since the 1800s, helped build the railroads and stuff from San Francisco. Everything else is pretty marginal, like single digit penetration from other countries at that point. But we had the blacks and the whites, and they were segregated, right? Blacks went to one school, whites went to the other school. White kids got the better teachers, the black teachers got the worst teachers, supposedly, right? There were water fountains. You literally were not allowed to drink at a particular water fountain if you were black. You had to sit in the back of the bus. Couldn't enter in restaurants through the front door. Couldn't live in communities with other whites. Nowadays, that's illegal. It's desegregation. If you're caught forcing anyone to do that kind of shit, you are in so much trouble in this country. So it's progress. It's one of the few sets of laws that have benefited man since people have been, since the folks that are still alive have been alive, right? Your baby boomers. They got a beautiful upgrade. People like me, I was born into the upgrade, and so I don't know the difference as much. What's interesting now is that where you used to have a white kid sitting in a class with a privileged white teacher, or a black kid sitting in a school with a black teacher who may or may not be great, we don't know. Let's just say you take the racism assertion. I don't know why I'm having such a hard time saying that today. Then you would have to assume that the black kids didn't have the best teachers. Now, I've actually heard it argued by some black friends of mine that they actually got superior educations in a segregated school system. And the interesting thing is that there's been all these studies about the power of a black male within a black culture. And it's very interesting that when kids that are black go to white schools and they have to go up with a white female teacher, the amount of respect they're willing to give her, it really is, she has to earn it. It's not given. So I've got some friends of mine that believe that the best way to teach a black student, male or female, is with a black male teacher or a very strong black female teacher. Which is interesting. I have no reference of whether or not that is actually true. But today, white kids sit next to black kids and brown kids. It's all brown. Asians, Mexicans, everybody. We all sit together now in school. And you sit shoulder to shoulder. And so, at that point, the only metric left is really, where do you live in the United States? Do you live in a ghetto? Do you live in an urban, sprawling neighborhood? So based on the district taxes, how much does your school district pay teachers to teach? I've had several friends of mine. In fact, I still know kind of an acquaintance friend of mine who teaches in the ghettos in the Inland Empire here in Riverside. And I've heard that, it doesn't matter what race you are. These kids are strung out on bullshit. And they fight. And they will not pay attention to the teachers half the time. Common Core has helped them because finally they can offer some passing grades to the idiots. But today you sit next to whoever you think has got the privilege due to their skin color, their eye color, their hair color. And so now the algorithm is who pays attention more to the teacher? Who does their homework? Who subscribes to good culture? Who subscribes to bad culture? Meaning, self-destructive gangster bullshit, or maybe some form of academia that actually is an employable trade. You get good at computers, you get good at musical instruments, you can mix a song, fix a roof, fix an engine. So what ends up happening is we have actually made some serious progress, in my opinion, in leaning out the excuses. There's still excuses out there that I think are fairly legitimate. Several hundred years of repression will mess up a genetic strand. It just does. But I do believe that one can recover fast, right? And being poor does not equal being less intelligent. I know some rich white people who are as dumb as hammers, So one does not equal the other. Morgan Freeman was asked once, how do you get rid of racism? And he says, stop talking about it. I think that's interesting. What could he possibly mean? I mean, don't we need to take a knee to show how fucking profound our brain cells are? Isn't that the way to do it? And one of the smarter men in the world says, don't talk about it anymore. I think what he might be saying is telling someone that it exists is the first thing that you can do to injure an individual's perception on things. Just like the CNN guy that thinks that you're not allowed to tell kids in the ghetto that they're ever going to escape because according to his Ivy League ass, he was the only black guy that got out of the ghetto. Oh, maybe he wasn't even born in the ghetto. Maybe he had a silver spoon and he just wants to keep his fellow black people down. Only I get to be the black guy on television who interviews on CNN. You stay down there where you are. Morgan Freeman turns to the guy and says, bullshit. Right? I just mentioned this on another episode, but I'm going to go for it again because we're right there. He says, how dare you tell a kid that they can't escape? Right? The CNN reporter, his game is to make sure that his little coveted spot in CNN is not contested by any one of his fellow black males. The more he can keep what's his and call his mommy and tell her how great he is, that's his game. And I've seen this a million fucking times in the Bay Area. Selfish. Incredibly narcissistic. Super undereducated in the ways of the world, fairly educated in the ways of indoctrination and academia. But you know what it's like to have someone full of a bunch of knowledge and then someone having some wisdom, knowledge experienced. Morgan Freeman sitting across the table, an elder, is wise. CNN guy lives in complete fucking propaganda lies. Right? He's used to sitting there getting paid to bullshit people. He must think he's a lot better than everyone else in the ghetto to say, oh no, you're relegated to this. You can't get out. Watch CNN. We'll make sure that the blacks don't escape the ghetto. Except this one guy, it looks like a girl. He escaped. That's all right. Anderson Cooper, well, he's straight up Vanderbilt grandson, trained in the CIA. It's no wonder he's an anchor on CNN, right? Because fake news, right? I'm always talking about Richard Pryor on the show. And I did an episode I don't even know which one. I was talking about Richard, and one of the cool things about Richard is that he was able to get us to get along by representing the goofiness of white people and the goofiness of black people, because that was really, again, that was the big concern in the 70s, was those were the two races. Everyone else was kind of minding their own business, or their penetration to the United States was negligible. And there was a quick interview with him with this weird guy. I've never seen him before, goofy white guy. And he was asking Richard Pryor about somehow, what the establishment is most afraid of when it comes to Richard. And he said that, without hesitating, he said, well, they're afraid that I'm going to make everyone get along by seeing their differences and laughing at them. And that was what I got from him and put it in an episode, probably 150 episodes ago. And I never heard him say it. And so to hear him say it, I'm sitting there thinking to myself, geez, he was completely conscious that this was what he was doing, which is why it became obvious to me. It's fantastic. And this is the guy that wrote, all the racial white lines of the movie Blazing Saddles. All the N-word use, he wrote them. But they made it absurd, and they made it funny that it was so absurd that someone would use the harsh language that they did. And that's the power of creating a relief valve against the cultural differences and the pressures. Now again, I was super fortunate. I grew up in a little country town, probably 95% white. The other two cultures we had were the Mexican, a few Mexican families, and a few black families. But again, there was a rib joint at the east side of town called Irma's. It's Roy and Irma Williamson. And I was so young and I had to move away because my parents moved away at the age of 8, that my memory of these folks was pretty much between, I'd say, probably 3 and 8, but it was super impactful. So those 5 years were huge, and we'd always come back and visit during the summer when we came back, which is only a couple hours away. But they eventually sold their place in 1980. So that was it. It was an end of an era. But again, I'm this little tiny white kid, little gold hair, the little bowl haircut back in the day. Not quite a bowl haircut, but that haircut that we all had in the 70s. I'm pretty naive. And I would just sit downstairs in the billiard room with, I still have visions of this room like it was yesterday in my head. Crazy. And there was always, I don't know, probably at least a dozen black guys down there. And the oldest of the bunch would sit, because we had the whole wall with chairs. It's just like a billiard room. These chairs that hang off the wall. They used to have a pad. And the oldest guy would be on the end with me. And I'd sit down there, and I'm teeny tiny kid. And I'd sit and watch billiards. And I didn't have any clue how billiards was played, but it just looked cool. The bumpers on the table, a bunch of orange balls. Just didn't get it at all. And this old guy would thumb me a quarter every once in a while, and they had a Coke machine in the corner, those old 50s Coke machines. We got to pull the little vertical door and yank the bottle out through the compressed metal clamps. Most of the time I couldn't get the bottle out, so they'd have to come over and do it for me, and you just crack the top cap off of the bottle in the front of the machine, you sit down. It's what you see in Fallout 4 all the time. But I just sat there and I watched these guys play. And it was just, for hours when my parents were ordering food upstairs. And I had to go up and eat eventually. But it was just the most incredible impression I ever had. And I always felt super at home around the black culture my whole life. It's just, there's something extra soothing about it for me in most cases. Because I feel like I get it on some level. I don't understand all their inside jokes and stuff. I got friends of mine who are comedians that are black, and they'll say a line or two and I don't get it, and they're like, well, it's because you didn't come from the ghetto. I'm like, yeah, guess not, but I want to know, tell me, right? My father was always, and still is, very, I don't even know what the hell you call it, he's sort of colorblind when it comes to music. He no one has like Chinese albums in our house or anything like that, but it's very European, but soul music, metal, techno, very diverse. And so I grew up in that. And so what's interesting about it is there's a pro and there's a con. So the pro is that I grew up really outside of any inbred racism. The con is that I don't know what it's like to be inside a deeply rooted racist neighborhood where I can't escape and go back to my oasis. Now, I've always talked about Massachusetts being pretty crazy, but you have two white, I guess, races going after each other, the Irish and the Jews fighting all the time. And me and the black kid are walking off, going home. And we got to get back to our place where we lived, and it was a quarantined area where we didn't have to deal with this bullshit, except fighting through the woods to get home, right? And so, being born, when I was born in 1969, and looking out at, when I finally went back and saw the videos of what was going on in America before, desegregation and before Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and all them, it was hardcore. It was like inconceivably bizarre how people were, living in their fear bubbles and making their fear turn into racial slurs. Right? But today it's being exacerbated, right? The Democratic National Convention likes illegal immigrants to come across the border because they turn them into voters. And they are easily frightened. Because if you're truly new to this country, then, you don't know much. You just kind of know there's money on the other side. You're going to work hard and that kind of stuff. Because Mexico has federales and drug lords and stuff, you kind of live a very guarded life. And so when you're here, and there's none of that here, then if someone smiles and gives you a voting ballot, you're going to do whatever they say. But it's just literally stealing a vote is all it is, right? Now, for the black folks that are here in America, they're not migrating from anywhere, right? So they know the game. So what the Democrats do is that they play this little race card every once in a while, and they can only play it about every 8 to 16 years because it's a bullshit card. The blacks always wake up because they're always screwed over by the DNC, by the Democratic Party in general. And so then there's lucidity, which is how Trump got in office, right? Now, the interesting thing about America is that we have these, and this is really every country in the world, but we're one of the most recent ones to go, which is that we built a country on top of another group's country, the Native Americans, who were so squeezed out of existence. It's really phenomenally bizarre that we've actually squeezed them down to reservations. And we can have LGBT groups, LGBT groups. We have Black Lives Matter, we have Antifa, all this kind of stuff, but no one gives a shit about the Native Americans. The one group that probably has the biggest beef would be the Native Americans. Yeah, we want our reservations to grow back to the sizes that they were, or a hell of a lot closer. We want the ability to exercise our religions. What if the Shoshone Indians said, look, we used to be a migratory, nomadic tribe that went in a huge circle around the United States, and we want this trail to be restored so we can live the way we used to live. Now, obviously, they want modern technology too, but, they could make a case one way or the other, right? In America, you have at least, for my black friends that I've had the privilege of really talking about this deeply with them, and The 40 acres and a mule thing comes up every once in a while, which is, at some point the government granted, I can't remember what year it was, granted this notion that every black male was going to get 40 acres and a mule for his family. Of course, it never happened. And then we have, so as Americans, we have the guilt of taking away Native Americans. Now, of course, we didn't do it personally, but we are benefiting from this land grab. History has been revised to make Native Americans seem like savages, being accused of scalping, which they didn't do until they were scalped. It's pathetic, the history that's going on there. We said that they died of smallpox and influenza, when we really probably massacred most of them. But these revisionistic history stories allow us to sleep at night. For the blacks, it's very interesting. Blacks are encouraged in America to look at whites with disdain. Now again, there's plenty of racist white people. There are. Whether it be mild or whether it's 1 or 11, they exist. And I think we all have sort of frustrations with cultural things at some points. But we have to always remember it's usually that one individual that's doing that, and we don't like the individual. It doesn't matter what color they are, what race, and that kind of thing. But you've all heard that before. But the way that the slaves got to America was by the French and the Spanish going to Africa, and we don't really know the truth. I mean, the truth that has been, the story that's been given to us is that, there are stories of white conquistadors going over there and grabbing them with spears and polearms and what have you, and putting them on boats, shackling them, putting them on boats. And then there's the other story, which is someone simply paid off the leader over there to put him in shackles and bring him over. What actually happened, all we know is that they got put on boats. The boats were atrocious. A good 30 to 50% of these slaves died in the boat because they got sick and they weren't fed at all. So the only ones to make it were the absolute fittest of the bunch. And then, of course, after they get here, they're pure blood African at first, and then there's a ton of mating. Because Whitey figured out that there's some incredibly beautiful African women. I think probably some of the females of the plantation also liked the black male. And so there's a lot of interbreeding. And we've created some super cool combinations. I mean, it really mixes well in a lot of cases. And I'll probably get some KKK guy threatening my life for saying that. Let's just move on to let's finish up the story here. The problem with, an African American here in the United States, looking to his left or his right, or her left and right, and looking at a white person saying, you're a slave owner. Your family line has slaves in it. You brought it. You own slaves. You brought us over on boats. Is that a lot of families didn't get to America until after slavery was abolished. For the ones that came over, a lot of our families were indentured servants, just exactly like the slaves. Now, as per my grandmother, who is half Knight, Knight. They have turned into the Knight Shipping Company, if you guys see those driving around. She said that they were indentured servants and that they had to escape the plantation they were working on because it wasn't going to, it was like a 10-year plan to get out of there, and it wasn't working. And the plantation owners know that scam. You get paid $1 a day. You have to pay 93 cents back to the plantation, but you own 10 grand a head or some crazy number that you're never going to reach, right? It's like a bad credit card debt. So to turn to your fellow white man in America and accuse them of doing this, no. Go to France. Go to Spain and ask the king and queen or the government over there to give you your 40 acres and a mule in that country, because those are the folks that brought you over, your ancestors. But the other thing, too, is that almost no black person in America is purebred. You got some white in you, too. And again, I think the country's better off with these mixes. They're amazing. But it doesn't matter. If you're pure blood, that's fine. None of my family members that I can find, and we go back to 1630, owned slaves. Never happened. We weren't rich enough, you know. I don't know what their mental attitude towards it was. I think very few folks in America had slaves. You're talking about rich people who can feed another human being on a daily basis, provide shelter. As good or bad as it might have been, that's a tremendous effort. To have 100 slaves, could you imagine what kind of money you got to come up with on a daily basis to feed and clothe individuals, even if it was tattered rags or whatever? I think it'd be pretty hard. But then Tarantino comes out with a movie, Django. Uses the N-word almost 300 times. And you see these brutal battles where they bring in two of the biggest males to fight to the death in the lobby. Or sorry, the living room of the house, right? And that goes into people's minds as truth and a common practice among white slave owners. It's a story. I'm sure something like that has happened in the history of mankind, but it's a fictional story that, because it looks real, becomes, real in people's minds. For me, racism goes one of two ways. It is either driven by pure ignorance, aka a lack of knowledge about another culture, where you're filling in the blanks of what's going to happen there. Or you have had a definitive moment when your culture differs from someone else's culture. What's really fascinating in my own neighborhood, and this isn't, some of my neighbors, I think that they came in with a heavy culture that was very pure to where they came from. And others are mixed families where you have two different cultures marrying each other and having these amazing kids. And the same thing happened for both sets of people. They come to our neighborhood and it's well established, right? Not a lot of movement in the homes around here. People have been living here for my neighbors have been living here for 55 years. Okay, and it goes down the street. And again, some people are new, but most of them aren't. But they come in, and some of them have parties a lot. It's just party, 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 party. And then there's this weird thing where they realize no one else does that. So the parties start to go down in number. They start to end earlier. They start to get a little less loud and obnoxious. In some cases, they stop completely. And that person sort of absorbs into the neighborhood. All right. That's a natural thing. But you got to give them time. This show has, if you go all the way back to season 1, there's 2 dogs. And the dog next door, Ginger, passed away about a year ago. But you can hear her. She's immortalized in this. She's a little Pomeranian. She got immortalized in the show here. But I got a new dog that's next door. And he's also in a lot of episodes too. And what's interesting is that dog, the one that's still alive, younger, he did the same thing that all of us human beings do, which is to come into the neighborhood. First, he's scared. Doesn't know where the hell he is. We got a big street out here, and we got helicopters and motorcycles and race cars going by. Other dogs barking, me talking in the backyard. And at first, it just freaked him out, and he was barking like, without a doubt, 8 to 10 hours a day. People were trying to call, the pet agency that comes around and checks out. But eventually that little dude calmed down back there. He only comes out a couple times a day. He only barks for maybe 5 minutes and he goes back inside. Because he's got his domain figured out now, right? He feels comfortable. He filled in the gaps of fear with knowledge and now he's relaxed. And that's what everyone on the street does too. One of the oxymorons for me about athletes taking knees, which is this new trend, right, is that you have, I think it's 67% of the NFL is black, African American. The rest is all the races, right? But the crowd is about 98% white. And so, and again, I think it goes without saying, most of the owners of teams are white. Coaches, it just depends. We're getting a lot more senior coaches who are former players of all different races coaching. So the hundreds of millions of dollars that are going to these athletes, if they want to claim racial oppression, are coming to them by the white people that love every inch on their body, buy jerseys with their names on it and wear it to restaurants and that kind of stuff, holding up the prop of their pride for a person that doesn't have the same race or culture that they do. To have that group of people kneel, for me, is just a little mind-blowing. But what they try to do is say, I'm being a martyr. I'm being a martyr for the folks that are not as fortunate as me. If that's the case, buy some fucking knee pads and never get off your goddamn knees, because there is no limit to the people in this world who are suffering. What you need to do is get off your fucking ass and go and help those people if that's what you want to do. Stop playing football. That doesn't help anybody. It's a Titus Flavius Coliseum of utter propaganda distraction. If you want to say who's hurting the world, it's anybody who distracts people from reality. That's what a sports person does. If you really want to split hairs, you want to hold the technicality about racism and you're not going to stand up for the national anthem, well, I can beat you at your game, right? Right now we have a giant fucking cancer in the world. It's called globalism. It is the wet dream of the elite banking cartel families that want to run this world. Their goal is to destroy all nation states however they can. To lose pride in your country. When your country, which has plenty of warts and bruises and weird things that it does, overall is good. If you think about America, the problem with America, and there's a pro and there's a con. The people believe they're doing good because they have been told propaganda that that's what they're doing. The bummer is that we're not doing good in a lot of cases because we're getting duped by the very people that are fueling the sentiment that makes people kneel. There will be no football if America ceases to be America. There'll be no $100 million paychecks if America ceases to be America. And if you think that that is sensationalistic, then why don't you take a fucking field trip to North Korea and come back and tell me how much of that shit you see. North Korea is kept around as a social experiment if there ever was one. How much can you totally repress people and keep them quarantined away from the rest of the world, when the rest of the world can use Skype to call the rest of the world? And absolute photoreal cameras, photoreal displays, the most amazing crystal clear audio you've ever heard in your life. First time I used Skype when it first came out, which I don't even remember what year, but it's probably around 2005, 2006, somewhere in there. I'm Skyping with my development team in Peru. The only outside team I ever hired. An incandescent light bulb burned out during the phone call. And we weren't doing video because I think the internet bandwidth was still kind of shitty and the cameras were pretty bad. But the audio was so clear that I heard an incandescent light bulb burn out. And I said, "Did you just have a bulb burn out?" And he's like, he had turned around because it freaked him out. And he turns back around and he goes, "Oh my God, you can hear that?" I said, "Yeah, Skype doesn't seem to compress the audio. It's beautiful, perfect audio, right?" But even with all this technology, North Korea can't get a message from the outside world. There are forces that want America to be that bad. To be utterly controlled by some crazy bastard who eats pie all day. while we feel fortunate to be alive, let alone have any choice in our life, right? The world is different all over the place. It just is. Go to Mexico. Just go to anywhere down in South America and drink the water. See what happens to your asshole. They have a bunch of microbes that we don't have. And I guess we have some they don't have. So they get sick when they drink our water for a while until we build up the antibodies to get rid of shit. Or the bacterial cultures that eat the other bacteria. When they shoot movies all over the world, they have to bring all the food with them and all the water with them. Even as far back as 1974 to 77, when they were filming the principal footage for Star Wars, George Lucas said, I bought dehydrated chicken and my own water with me. Because he went to, Tunisia and a few other places. I think I have that right. We have different bodies with different capabilities. One of the funniest things I ever watched was a video, some sort of reality show, probably about 5 years ago, where some white guy went to Australia. I don't think he was from Australia, but maybe he was. But his thing was he was going to cross one of their big deserts. And he read up on everything of what he's supposed to bring and how he's going to get there. He got bot flies all over him too, which is just disgusting. But he was being filmed in one area, and there was a Aborigine guy that looked like Morgan Freeman, tall, skinny guy. I think he had kind of like an old suit on. And he had just a couple gallons of water. And here he is with very dark skin, which if you just take light and do the properties of how he's feeling, he's absorbing the photons, right? He's absorbing all the thermal heat. And he's got clothes on. And this white guy has got shorts on, or whatever. I don't know what he had, but I think he did have shorts with his kind of REI boots and just tons of water and tons of rations and all this fancy stuff, little pieces of paper covered in chrome so he could use the sun's light to heat up water. I mean, it's just, it sort of looked ridiculous. But he gave up. He gave up crossing the desert, and the other dude walked right across it with no problem. What was the difference? Well, it was a cultural difference. It was a physiology difference. But on paper, it would look like the black guy, the Aborigine, wouldn't have been able to make it across the desert because he's got too much clothes on, and he's dark. His skin is dark, and so he should be boiled up by the heat. Even though his skin's thicker, he's absorbing a tremendous amount of heat. His dehydration should have been through the roof. But it wasn't. He was a gracious man, too. He didn't showboat at all. He just kept to his guns and just peacefully walked across. He had a cane or something, too. But he brought the cane, I don't think because he needed assistance walking, but because he knew it was a great way to keep away predators. Because every animal is scared the shit out of you. It will scared of you until you back them in a corner, and then they'll go after you. Now, the low-hanging fruit to create this disenfranchised sect of people is to suggest that the only difference that man has against man is related to the color of their skin and the culture that they geographically evolved from. Mexico, or the Spanish blended in with the Incas and what have you and became Mexican, or the Aborigines in Australia living hard lives, the Polynesians in the Polynesian Islands and Hawaii, Eskimos, Asians, and Germans, and Romans, and Arabs, and Jews, and all these things, the Africans, right? But it's a big planet. As much as we've shrunk it with communication and pictures, it's still a big planet. We're pretty tiny as compared to its overall radius, right? And so we all advanced at different levels. It's been asserted, I think, quite accurately that one of the reasons why your native Africans, who are still in tribes and still using face paint and beads and, elongating their necks and picking their mates by how high they can jump, there's been a lot of study to try and figure out why that group of folks never really advanced. Again, according to European advancements. You ever think about it? How is it that one group of folks can launch a rocket to go in low orbit around the Earth and fly jets and, study quantum physics, and this other group can't conceive of any of those things? How did that happen? And there's a brilliant theory that I don't know if it's new. It's new to me, and it's beautiful and it's simple, which is if you live in an area of the world and your culture becomes perfectly balanced with that area of the world, then your need to grow, your mother of invention, is non-existent. You know exactly how to get up and chase down a lion until he pants to death, and you hit him with a bunch of spears, cut him up, and feed him. You know where the fruit is. You know where the water is. You don't have, your skin that you put on as clothing is coming off the animals, so no big deal. Your huts that you live in are perfectly acclimated to the type of weather that you have. There's no weather condition that you haven't completely taken into account, from a monsoon to normal rain to pure sunlight. All taken care of. And so the neural mesh in the brain doesn't need to get complicated anymore, because, again, it's only going to procreate in your brain if you get overstimulated electrically and you hold that stimulation by thinking. Well, when some of us moved north, us albinos moved north, we ran into a lot of obstacles. The weather was a lot more seasonal, right? Super cold winters, super hot summers. The terrain was different. The predators were a lot more complex. The foliage that we had to run around in, in the middle Europe, which was Germania area, stuff can hide behind trees. Stuff can hide up in trees, right? Not that can't happen in the African plains, but there's a lot more visibility in most areas, right? Or it's a desert and no one goes in, right? So over time, that began to manifest. And so you have areas of the world that advanced. Well, now what do? When you finally conquered the skies in forms of planes, that's all you really need. You don't need a space station to accomplish this. You now can see all these other cultures that have no reason to advance. Those tribes that are stuck there in the Brazilian rainforest and the Argentina rainforests all over South America seemingly have never owned a television, seen a camera. A lot of the folks that take pictures of these folks, there are like modern objects in their tribes. Really funny, like a pot and pan and a knife, that they obviously got from some modern place, but they're still painting themselves orange, like every day. May or may not bathe regularly, who knows? But they're okay. They're in full balance with nature. And if you're watching me or hearing me right now, you're part of the other clan that went way the other way. Super duper dense growth. And now, we're at a point now where culture is supposed to work pretty much 16 hours a day. 8 hours of sleep, 16 hours a day. Because you go to work maybe 8 to 10 hours, and that's supposed to be fucking normal, right? Over 8 hours is nuts. But what happens? You got a laptop, you got an iPad, you got a phone. Work never stops. In fact, people get bored now and they create themselves a project on the side, which is their entrepreneurial thing, and they got work. So we have drawbacks, major drawbacks, in that we have been able to intellectualize on paper a society that doesn't work for our genetics. So anytime a culture moves into town that is still hanging on to previous, more balanced formulas, we think they're crazy. So there's a lot of comments about how other cultures are lazy. I think that's interesting. They're just in balance with nature a lot better in some cases, right? Believe me, there's plenty of lazy white kids all over the world. But what do we have now, though? We have this sort of white privilege, is what they're calling it. The problem with the haves and the have-not formula is that it's sort of bait for the ignorant. Because at all points, there'll always be someone that has something that the other person doesn't have. And it's not that thing is better. than what the other person has. It's just that they don't have it. And there's always a marketing company out there, whether it be the DNC or a true marketing company for a product, that will make you feel inferior because you don't have this thing you don't need, but your neighbor does. And as long as you can distinguish with your eyeballs that they are a different race than you, you can bullshit yourself that they got that object because of their racial privilege. What happens when you get it? What if you're able to go over to the other person and say, can I have that thing? And they go, yeah, you can have it. It's not that great, but I want it. Okay, yeah, here you go. Here you go. And let's say a white guy goes over, or a black guy goes over to a white guy and says, can I have that thing? And he gives it to the black guy. Now the Mexican guy is living next to the black guy, and he's looking at the thing going, holy shit, I want that thing. What is that thing? I don't even know what it is, but I want it. Goes back to that childhood fighting over toy thing. And now they got to sort it out. Maybe the black guy doesn't want to give it to the Mexican guy. Now there's this weird dispute. Now the Mexican guy can make a sign, walk down to the corner and say, I don't have this thing. I deserve this thing. But you know what will happen, right? Let's say society steps in and takes the thing away from the black guy and gives it to the Mexican guy. Well, that's going to create a permanent scar, isn't it? But in the meantime, while the black guy and the Mexican guy are fighting over this thing that came from the white guy got a new thing. And the process starts all over. And you could mix up, in my example, all the races. Chinese, Eskimo, Aborigine, Indian, Arab, Persian. It's going to be the same game forever. And to think that there's a bunch of NFL players that don't understand that, victimizing the utter sacrifice that we have made as citizens for this country to give them the privilege to play a fucking game for a living, right? They play games for a living. They don't work. They play a game. Oh, you got your playbook, and yeah, you got to lift weights, and yeah, you got to haul your ass around, and yeah, you're going to have so many fucking concussions by 50. If you can think straight, you're all right. There's still coaches that are senior enough that as soon as you join the NFL and you say, I am going to play a linebacker, I'm going to play a tackle, I'm going to play this, I'm going to play that, defensive end. These guys can look at you and go, okay, so that position, your average life expectancy is 63 years old. That's the life expectancy anyone who plays this position, because you get hit in the head this much, your back gets destroyed, your joints get destroyed. But you're going to make a lot of money. You're going to have a pretty good life for those 63 years. You're going to need a lot of physical assistance after 45. But hey, medicine keeps getting better. There's this really inexpensive crane you can put next to your bed in the morning that'll lift you out of your bed into your wheelchair. And maybe stem cell research advances and you can grow back vertebrae that are gone. But unless you're in a position in the world to socially engineer the world, to make things better, perhaps be a philosopher who can write a book that really talks to the people and really pulls these kind of things out and calls out the bullshit that is complete bullshit and legitimizes things that are legitimate, we're going to be in this vicious cycle forever. The first person to tell me that affirmative action was bullshit was a black male. And it was shocking to me. I said, well, why do you say that? And he was at an educational institution as an employee. He says, well, it's the number one reason why black males and females cannot get into college. And I'm like, whoa, I know you're right because you're educated and you're in this industry, but please explain it to me because I don't get what you're saying. Isn't it made specifically to help minorities go to school? He said, yeah, but it's no longer us. We are no longer the minority that is targeted by affirmative action. It's immigrants. And, I've sorted out, trying to find out, if he was being racist about his comments. And the thing is that he worked in admissions. He saw the numbers. I consequently, a couple of years ago, programmed a system that tracked all this information. For 2 years. He's right. He's completely right. I've been to England 3 times, as I've said several times on the show. Other than staying at the Lancaster Hotel, every single place I went, I was assisted at restaurants and other retail stores by usually a black Jamaican woman who consequently kept her, I guess, her traditional clothing from where she came from, which in our world, in America, would be tantamount to Aunt Jemima pancake syrup. That old sort of 1930s looking head wrap with sort of the apron clothing, and it started to get eerie. One time, hey, everyone deserves a job. And, obviously I have to say this, the most polite people ever, but there was suffering in their eyes. And it made me feel uncomfortable. But I don't hear about soccer players taking knees over there. Football players is what they call it over there. So there's weird standards all over the world. And maybe it was just sheer coincidence that in 3 trips, every time I went into public, it was very rare, at least in food services is really where I saw it the most. I didn't do, cell phone shopping over there or anything. But it was just phenomenal. Now, I've also been privileged to live in Los Angeles. And Los Angeles is a beautiful melting pot where not only do folks get to live here, there's, obviously we have probably the biggest immigration that goes on in Los Angeles is definitely our brothers to the south, our Mexicans that move north. We have a fair amount of Asians that move in, brand new off the boat. And we have, a light sprinkled Middle Eastern and sort of Pakistani Indian groups that come over. And the rest is all either pretty native, get a few Europeans, but that's super rare. Me hearing someone with a British accent who's moved over is pretty rare. We had a few of those from EA when I used to work there. But it's like 1 out of, 1,000 people would be like that. Now, once they get here to Los Angeles area, Southern California, a couple things happen. If they're totally fresh off the boat, first generation family members coming over, they're pretty lost for a while, and they just work hard, keep their mouths shut, and just try to figure it out. They're trying to learn English properly. They're trying to be effective, trying to keep the eyeballs off of them, right? They don't want to cause any reason for police to pull them over and that kind of stuff, which is kind of funny because one of the biggest jokes we have here in LA is that if you're driving at night and you find a car going 10 miles under the speed limit in the slow lane, chances are it's an immigrant trying to drive super careful on these massive highways that we have here because they don't have those kind of highways in some of the rural areas where these folks come from. So they're terrified. They're hanging on the steering wheel for dear life. There's a lot of stereotypes about Asian people driving badly. You could say that happens, but the main reason is that these folks are fresh off the boat and they have never driven a car in their lifetime. They drove bicycles. They walked. And so hanging on to a 2-ton car, driving down a highway with 5 to 7 lanes per direction with a bunch of aggressive drivers like myself and other folks that we grew up driving cars since 14, it's we sometimes forget that these individuals are sitting in their car utterly terrified. But in California, we also have a sort of disagreement with the Mexicans down south, in that there have been times when the folks that live down south believed that they've been told that they completely owned and controlled America, which is really fascinating when you look at Native American history. And what you'll realize, when I wrote my first screenplay, I did a tremendous amount of Native American research in Stanford University. And you could poo-poo that I got propaganda, but these books were actually extremely revealing, and I found other books, and I've got an employee of mine that was 100% Native American. He taught me another huge collection of data. But what's really true is that the Native Americans actually owned, or controlled, I should say, probably a good third of Mexico. So when the border comes down at Texas and then starts wrapping back up to Baja California and San Diego, the real map is that the little handle that goes down there to the Gulf that rubs up against Mexico, that actually kept going down deep into Mexico, and there's like at least 4 tribes of Native Americans that were down there. And a lot of my Mexican friends exude this beautiful Native American design in their face, which is fantastic. But the disenfranchised incubation by the DNC and La Raza and all these different groups is to make them feel like they are victims of whitey. They're made out of European Spanish and the native cultures that were there when they came over to try and find gold for the Queen and King of Spain, right? They're kind of a new race. It's kind of cool. It's 2 good bloodlines mixing together. It's great. Now, in Southern California and Northern California, there's Spanish city names all the way up to Oregon. And then there's a lot of Native American names. You know, I come from Wichita. I don't come from Wichita. I come from the southeast Kansas, but I was raised in Neosho County. There's Wichita, Kansas. You know, I mean, it's all these Native American names. There's Shawnee County, and, you know, it doesn't stop there. And I've got Mexican friends of mine, full-blooded Mexican friends of mine, who are for the border down south. And they actually, their families have been here for probably 4 generations. And they legally immigrated over here. And they don't believe in illegal immigration because they love America. They're all American folks. They've sacrificed everything, gone to war for the country, and they don't believe in illegal infiltration. But, you know, I don't hear this discussed a lot, so I'm going to throw this into this episode. Europe, for the first time, is really incurring immigration. Because as much as they have the privilege of being bordered with tons of countries over there and learning a bunch of different languages and sort of being in a segregated melting pot, like it's usually vacations where they would travel, you know, because you could be in London and take a set of trains all the way down to Rome and spend a week there and then come back home. You know, you never flew. You were just on the Channel and through all the network of mass transit that's in Europe. But in America, we really absorb people. We absorb them permanently. And I know that Europe does this too. Trust me. I know that there's been Arab neighborhoods over there forever, and there's Armenian neighborhoods, and that happens here in Los Angeles like crazy. We have areas of Los Angeles that are predominantly a particular race. They just enjoy their neighborhoods and they get to celebrate their culture, and it's all good. But the main concern that a lot of folks have with immigration from countries that are having serious human rights problems is the question of this. You know, love or hate America. What America was initially formed out of were the folks that, like I've said several times on the show, that were tired of the monarchy of Europe, moved here under the pretense that they were going to expand the European empire to the Americas, right? So we have this huge slaughter of the Native Americans, and then everything settles down, and we fight the Mexican, you know, contingency down here to the south. So it all calms down. Everyone kind of takes a big deep breath. Very unfortunate that happened. But the spirit of an average European that came over here was to defend sovereign rights, to defend what we eventually called the Constitution, which is based off Magna Carta, which has had a hell of a time staying in power in Europe, especially with Merkel now over there, right? Europe is like undoing everything over there. It's made Europe amazing. But now you have, let's say, Mexico. Mexico has a huge set of problems. They have federales that are cops that can rough you up, put you in jail, extort money out of your family, fake charges, just because they can. And the government doesn't step in. So your DNC, your Democratic Party, and a lot of the shilly right-wing folks, that are trying to help globalism, like a Senator McCain or Pelosi, they can take a paycheck and destroy their country. That's what they're capable of doing and what they've been doing their entire career. They do not care about anything other than being members of CFRs, Bilderberg groups, Council on Foreign Relations, CFR, Trilateral Commission, etc. They want these status symbols from these outside agencies, right? And they need votes to stay in office, and so they smuggle these folks in that don't know any better, and they'll get votes. But now, if you took a citizen of Mexico that is willing to leave their native land, which is gorgeous, by the way, right? If America ever just inherited Mexico, like if we made them a state of America, then the richest people in America would develop all the land in Mexico, and Mexicans wouldn't have the money to live there because they have beautiful coastlines, incredible weather. Just go to Costa Rica. It's one of the most famous places in, the South American belt down there, right? There would need to be modern amenities put in, like plumbing and electricity in a lot of these rural areas, but it would get done. But if you move a bunch of folks that are unwilling to fight for what we have fought for in America, and perhaps in certain phases of Europe, then what happens is if you were to think of like America with your people who are proud Americans that are willing to fight for the sovereignty and hold up the Constitution in all ways, not these motherfuckers taking knees, and you think of those folks, the good folks, as the skeletal support structure, the muscles, the parts of the human body that do all the work, then the folks that come up without the capability of fighting for their native land, which there shouldn't be anything more powerful than perhaps your family themselves. But when you think about your family, you should think about your country. And if you don't like the country that you live in, you got to make changes in your country. It's your land. It's where you're born. Your people have fought for centuries to build that country. And if you're unwilling to fight for that, then you're sort of a fat cell. You're sort of, you're not completely useless or anything, but you only need so much fat in the human body before you're done. You should probably start leaning out, right? So you're definitely not part of the skeleton structure that holds up freedom and sovereignty. And so importing a bunch of folks into a country, then again, will vote for the globalist candidates, and they're on both sides of the fence, right? You've undone the very fabric of a country that is great, or was great, depending on what time you want to look at it in the timeline of things. And so, I can definitely say I've been in many conversations with friends of mine that defected across the border from Mexico illegally. It was like 20, 30 years ago in some cases. One of my buddies came here in 1988. He walked up the center of the 405 during a guard change at the border. He timed it perfectly, so he's walking where the cars go. And he walked up, and I think he got picked up by a relative or something that got him to Los Angeles. And when he got here, what was very interesting is his relative said, look, this ain't a free ride. This ain't a free ride. You got to go get yourself a job. You can have that mattress in that room. You're going to have to share with a couple of your cousins and some of our friends that we have here. But if you don't work and if you don't make money, you're going back home. Or we're at least kicking you out. And he worked his ass off. At the same time, his family respected America and said, we're here now. And this is the last stand. We're not going anywhere else. And if anyone tries to take away the freedoms that we have just inherited by crossing the border illegally, this is where we fight. Because we have odds of winning here. In our home country, the police are corrupt. So there's no chance of winning. Well, it's a lot harder to win, let's put it that way, down there. When I meet those individuals, I have no worries at all. And I haven't sat down at some huge collective and talked to all of the immigrants that came in from Mexico. My hope is that they're all like my friend's family, that they respect the country that they have now moved to, and they're willing to throw down if anything happens. They certainly aren't weak people, right? They're not physically weak. Yeah, sure, maybe due to education, they may or may not know how to program a computer, but, they can definitely defend our country perfectly. But there is a limit to how much we can dilute and absorb. It's really the absorption rate should control the immigration rate. Because if we bring in too many folks that don't have the ability to warm up to where they're coming from and feel the need to defend the Constitution and that kind of stuff. Again, a lot of them, if they go through normal migration or immigration steps, they know more about this country than half the kids that graduate college around here. They know all 50 states. They know where the capitals are. They know the executive branches of government. They have to pass and get legal admission into the country, right? I was recently told a statistic that out of the Native American people, and I don't mean Indian, or the formerly called Indian Native Americans, but of the European privileged white kids, less than 25% of them can name one executive branch of the government. They don't know where all 50 states are, barely know a capital. So probably less than half a dozen capitals out of 50. They couldn't quote a single amendment, a single amendment to the Bill of Rights, right? They can't talk about the 1 through 10. They can't talk about the ones after that. Because their education here is starting to get horrible. Something we have to fix, right? If I were to conclude this episode with some statement, that is like Rodney King sort of statement where it's, can't we all get along? Most of you would roll your eyes. The sad part is that is really what needs to happen. In September of 2017, taking a knee during the national anthem, when you are more privileged than most folks in the world, regardless of what your race is, right? It isn't really helping anything, in my opinion. Before you're wealthy, you think you need a tremendous amount of wealth. You think that that's the key to happiness. Undoubtedly, money can create a lot of pockets of freedom. But in the end, if you're a boring person, you will be bored to death. And I know plenty of super duper wealthy people with hundreds of millions, some with tens of millions, who struggle to keep themselves entertained. And when I think about especially athletes that are taking knees and making hundreds of millions of dollars, they don't need that much money in their lifetime. A lot of them won't have life expectancies that are long enough to use that amount of money for anything, right? But if they felt so compelled to take a knee, in my opinion, take your money and help the disenfranchised, and help them in a very specific way where you think they are disenfranchised. If you think racism is causing some injustice in the world, hey, do what you can to take your fortune, of which you don't completely need, and apply it to the areas that you feel so important. Because the idea is, if you're brilliant enough to take a knee, you're making a big statement of how ingenious you are about the racial struggles of any citizen in the world, let alone in America, right? And if you're that smart, then every dollar you spend to fix racism should be worth $10 of someone else investing the same amount of money who doesn't know what they're doing. There's a couple of things I want to mention. One of the things that keeps getting mentioned is the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan. When I was a really young kid in the 70s, I could turn on television probably every quarter, and they were filming some town in the South that was doing a KKK march, a peaceful protest, walking down the street with all their sheets on and their whatever. I don't really remember seeing swastikas when I was a kid in their hands, right? And a couple things about this. One, I don't see that anymore. And I didn't, before I left in the late 80s, I didn't see it either. I mean, it was starting to boil away. It was this thing that virtually every single white person I knew cringed when they saw these people on television. It was never like, well, at least somebody's standing up for the white race. I've never heard anything like that in my life. Even those that are the couple people I've met in my hometown, two, a young kid and an old fart who were scared of the blacks. It was like this two people my whole life that had that attitude. Ignorant. So that has largely died off in America. I don't think there's any reprisal of skinheads, of KKK people. I think their numbers have always been extremely low and probably declining overall. And yes, they do hide. I understand that. But there's this interesting place where kids that are raised to be racist undo their racism really, really fast. And it's a fascinating, yet sort of unfortunate reality. But the place that I have heard the most amazing transformations in racism is in war. You come in from wherever the hell you come into. You sign up to go to the military. They deploy you to a pretty much a random base that has a vacancy to teach you. You go through boot camp. You're surrounded by pretty much every race, and then you go off to war. You get deployed in some holding area where you sort of get your bearings together, like Kuwait, and then maybe you're dropped in Afghanistan or Iraq to do something. And the second that a bullet flies by your head, and you realize that the only way you can survive is to keep your numbers up as a group. It doesn't matter what race anyone is in your group. You're a group. And if you can convince yourself not to participate in the group because one guy's black or one guy's Chinese or one guy's Mexican, you're dead. Or you've just increased the odds that the entire group is dead. But I don't hear about that. I'm sure it happens in certain areas, I guess, but I have heard amazing stories to the contrary. People going in racist and coming out absolutely colorblind. Because when the shit hits the fan, none of this frivolous fucking racist bullshit matters anymore. You're a human being and you want to live. Now, war is obviously a super unfortunate outcome of any circumstance. But I think it's interesting that when someone of a different race saves your life or helps you in some profound way, the unbelievable transformation that individual has towards that race. And then once you can break the habit with one race, you start to break the habit with all the races in a lot of cases, right? And the last thing I'll mention is, imagine that all of the amazing cultural creations that happen to coincide with race, with the pigment of your skin, imagine that it all blended together and it all melted away. You have one form of music, one form of food, one form of clothing, a couple hairstyles for guys, a couple hairstyles for girls. It's turning into THX 1138, which had a black guy in it. And we lose Mexican food and soul food and whatever white donut food we make, and et cetera, across the planet. We lose our cultures. That thought hurts my soul. And you might think, well, we'll just maintain these recipes. We'll just know that they came from certain cultures. Maybe. Because certain cultures have been raised in various parts of the world, you've got problems with certain cultures having no tolerance for certain foods. Milk really messes up a lot of folks in this world. Super hot spices that are ingested in Asia and the South America region, white people can barely eat. We had a funny-ass experience in my group at EA. We used to go to this pub, which was... it's like a King Arthur pub or something like that in San Mateo, California. And they have this habanero burger. And they make this habanero paste. It's like, it is hardcore, right? Habanero is only about 350,000 Scoville. But when you make this paste, it feels like 1,000,000 Scoville. And the idea was they put it on a hamburger. And if you can finish the hamburger, I believe you got the hamburger for free. Or you got a beer for free or something. So my group got this idea to go there and do it. And I had an art director that is, I believe, Mayan. And this dude could eat fire and ask for more fire. and he ate this burger without sweating. In fact, he went and got more sauce so he could put it on the burger. And it was very genuine. He wasn't really trying to show off much. He was raised with super duper hot peppers. And all these white guys were trying to eat this thing. And man, they are sweating bullets and giving up and crying, literally eating this burger. But the other person who ate this burger with no problem at all was one of my artists from Singapore, a female. The most dainty, beautiful girl you ever saw. And you just didn't get that this would be something that could happen because of visual stereotypes, right? Of girls, young girls not being able to eat these super hot things. But she ate that burger, laughed all the way through it, couldn't really figure out what everybody's problem was eating this thing. Very fascinating. In my experience, being fairly colorblind, I've had a great life. I wouldn't take back my multicultural experiences for anything. You're going to see bad behavior from all human beings. And I can almost assure you, if you could stand in my patio and I say, give me your greatest case for disliking a particular race, give me the whole case study, I think I could probably come up with half a dozen people of your race that I've met, probably white, that have the same exact problem. It's just you allow that bias to become the cause of why you didn't like that race. And a lot of folks, by the way, that I've known in the Midwest, South, in Texas, which has a tremendous amount of racism, just overt racism, you have big fat white people who look in the mirror every day and go, I hate myself. Or I lost my job because I didn't learn anything new. I thought my paycheck would just come forever because I'm entitled to it. And I've heard them say, I lost my job because of that guy over there who's a particular color and he doesn't work very hard. Unbelievable. So there's also this self-loathing thing that goes along with usually trying to scapegoat a social algorithm of racism. Well, how do you fix that? You got to fix the entire country. Increase education. Continually educate yourself. Tell every citizen, if you sleep, you lose. I know a lot of people who are very wealthy here in Los Angeles. Like I always say, okay, I'm not trying to impress anybody. What I'm going to tell you is this. I know they're all of all colors, okay? But the difference between them and everyone else who complains about racism and being kept down by it is that these folks work their asses off every single day. And they educate themselves every single day. And if they were to think that they were racially profiled out of opportunities, a lot of my friends will say, I got to work extra hard to make it happen. I know white folks that say that, black folks that say that, Mexican folks that say that. And all they're saying is really what life demands out of a human being. Not out of a race. It helps. I mean, if you think you're getting racially profiled out of opportunities, you're going to have to work harder. But I'm telling you, it's like Cheech and Chong's third movie, Things Are Tough All Over. I never understood that until I got older. I was like, yeah, it is. It's right. Things are tough all over. What about India, where you have slums right next to the most amazingly wealthy places in India? They're all Indian. Yeah, there's several different tribes over there. But what are they supposed to say about their poverty? It's the white guy's fault? It's the black guy's fault? No. They're living 100% in their culture, in their region of the world. Whatever problems are going on in that area, it's because of their government not taking care of them, not fighting for a better government, perhaps, right? Why do Mexicans want to move to America? Something's wrong down there. There's no white guy down there controlling their wealth and controlling their federales. They control their world. By the way, they have a giant border on the south border of Mexico. Fucking huge. And it is well built, and the penalty for crossing the border is to get your ass shot. When my buddies go down there to do business, they're constantly pulled over and roughed up. Their possessions are stolen in trade for being let go. Doesn't happen here, does it? If you're susceptible to the race card, then I would say know you're being duped. You're being exploited. Not saying it's not happening to you here and there, but I've seen conversations on Facebook, excuse me, where there's a tiny innocent dispute about, was the recent one I heard about was a spoiler was given for a reality show. So the finale of the reality show was spewed up on someone's wall. You know, what an asshole to do that, right? And when another person said, why'd you do that? You know, I'm trying to watch the show. You shouldn't be telecasting the ending of a show or the first show of a particular season of something where all the secrets are coming out. And, the person pulls a race card and says, I don't have any sympathy for you because their life matters or whatever. Weird, right? Being duped into being rude to the rest of your fellow humans because they're buying this disenfranchised formula. Really sad. Anyway, I think you feel me. It's a very controversial subject. I think this version finally came out decent. We'll put this one up. If you're new to the show, there's a website, deepthoughtsradio.com. All the feeds are up there, video, audio, a locked Facebook group, a Patreon page, direct links to iTunes and Google Play for your audio. If you're coming in from a mobile device, you can go to the website, click the RSS feed, and as long as you have something on your phone that can understand a podcast, it'll automatically load up beautifully for you. Don't try to do that on a laptop or a desktop computer. It won't work very well. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.